talk about 1975 when we set up LUCS. Things were completely and utterly different from what they are today. There were no personal computers, none at all. There were no mobile phones. There was no internet. There was no email. But what there was an excellent community spirit in Linlithgow, and we were really well blessed with a lot of very, very active people in the community of Linlithgow. None less Melville Gray, who was the founder of LUCS. So I'll try and tell you about the first 10 years.
The camera isn't working for some reason.
It's been probably a bit
Why
better.
is that?
I think any questions you have, keep them till the end. Can somebody, can the people who are on Zoom mute themselves, please, all of you? Right. Yes. What was going to say? Yes. Can somebody keep their eye on the time, because my watch, which is one of these marvelous electronic watches, has run out of battery, so I don't know what time it is. The clock. Thank you, Martin. The clock's obviously at the wrong time, because I've actually started on time, it says, according to the clock, but that'll do fine. So I'm hoping to talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes. So roundabout, when the clock gets to about 10 past, I ought to stop. Yeah, so it was a very, very different set of times in those days. That doesn't work. Why not? No dear. I can't change slides now in the slideshow. There's something that's stopping me. I don't know. There we are. Right. Okay. The Union Canal, as you probably all know, it starts in Edinburgh and goes to Glasgow, but it cheats a bit and it stops at Falkirk, where it joins the Forth and Clyde Canal at Loch 16, about 31 miles roughly in length. In its heyday, the canal was pretty busy. This is it in 1863, and you note 1863, that is 20 years after the railway got opened. The railway opened in 1842, the canal opened in 1822, so it had been running for 40 years when Sam Brough painted this picture in Edinburgh, and you can see all the scows that were being used for transporting largely coal and heavy materials into Edinburgh, and largely manure and other rubbish out of Edinburgh. So that's tended to be what happened with the canal. The passenger traffic, I think, had mainly moved to the railway by that time. But bear in mind, at the peak of the canal, before the railway opened, it was carrying over 200,000 passengers a year between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So it was a really pretty busy and very important waterway in its day. But enough about the canal, let's talk about what happened before LUCS was established. The first thing was the Stirling Inquiry. There was a proposal to build a road using part of the route of the Union Canal as the route for the new road. And a public inquiry was held. The function of the public inquiry was basically to decide whether that was a good idea or not. Prior to that, the canal had been culverted in quite a few places, including Linlithgow here at Preston Road in the 1950s. When they built the Deanburn estate, they took away the Humpy Bridge and they put in a culvert. So the Stirling Inquiry was a public inquiry, and it looked at the question about what should be done with the Union Canal. And its outcome was really good, because it said nothing further should be done that would prevent the eventual restoration of the canal. So that didn't just rule out the road that they were proposing to put in, that ruled out anything anybody was planning to do that would prevent future restoration. So although it didn't restore the canal, it left the doors open, if you like, to a possible restoration at some time in the future. Round about the same time, the IWA was doing great works in England, and the Scottish Inland Waterways Association was founded as a separate organisation, but along the same sort of lines as the IWA. It was a members' organisation. In other words, it wasn't societies banding together, it was individual people banding together to look after the waterways interest in Scotland. It was the Scottish Inland Waterways Association, everybody called it SIWA, and our very own Melville Gray was one of the first chairmen of SIWA. He became a chairman of the Scottish Inland Waterways Association. Unfortunately, the waters were troubled. There was a lot of falling out went on in the committee. One of the principal proposals from SIWA was that they buy some kind of converted tug and operate it from Leith, from the docks at Leith. And as a result of that, Melville, unfortunately, first of all, had his first sort of psychotic incident, had a nervous breakdown, and second of all, developed a lifelong dislike of Siwa. He became an ex-Siwa person. But before that happened, 1972, Siwa had a rally in Linlithgow. They had it mainly in Rosemount Park, but they also had it here at the basin. They had boats in the basin, and I'll show you a bit of that later on. And the Civic Trust decided, under Melville's tutelage, if you like, to clear the towpath between Deanburn, where the new housing estate was now well established, and the railway station, on the basis that you could discourage people from taking their cars to the station if you could give them a decent walking path. So the lads from Paul McBostel were brought in, and they cleared the towpath between Deanburn. It was virtually impassable. I can remember it back in these days. It wasn't very nice. So they made a walking path between Deanburn and the station, and that's all that happened before LUCS was established. So LUCS was, if you like, the scene had been set. There was an inquiry that said nothing should be done to prevent restoration of the canal. We started doing a bit of work on it, and the canal interest in Scotland was getting quite enthusiastic. That is a picture of the Siwa Rally in 1972. I wasn't here at the time, but I understand it was a very successful event. I'm maybe going to try and focus this a bit. It's very bright. That better?
Minimize the windows at the top there.
Yeah.
So how do I do them? I minimize them.
Yeah, if you just go onto the windows there, there's a
Press the minus
top left there. The minus one up to the far left.
Oops, no, it's disappearing as I put the mouse over it. This one.
Yeah.
And I move that somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't. Oh, it'll disappear. Okay, right. Sorry. Yes, this was the Siwa Rally, 1972. A guy called Blake, David Blake, owned this boat, which is one of the remaining scows from the Union Canal. All the things on the canal had a number, and it was simply that British Waterways, who then operated it, started at the beginning of the Union Canal. They painted U1 on the first thing that they came across, and obviously this particular boat was the 66th item they'd come across along the canal. So it got called U66, which was painted on it. And David Blake refloated that. I think it had been previously along here to Polmont, and it was put into service for the Siwa Rally in 1972. That better? Right. Users of the canal, the whisky distillery at Linlithgow, St Magdalene's Distillery, were a regular user of the canal, not to make whisky, I hasten to add, but they used the water for cooling their still. The fishermen used to say that the fish in that particular stretch of canal were so much bigger and better than anywhere else. The water was nice and warm. There was a discharge pipe just about here somewhere that pumped water back into the canal. And that distillery ran from 1834, when it was opened. Provost Dawson built the distillery. The previous one had been at Bonnyton. He lived at Bonnyton and he had a distillery at Bonnyton, and he moved to the new St Magdalene's Distillery, 1834. And his main reason for moving to that particular site was the presence of the canal. The canal could be used for taking away the completed product, for bringing supplies in, and what have you. So it was a deliberate strategic move to build a business and industry next to the canal in order to take advantage of the canal being there. And it eventually closed in 1983. And I think Colin Galloway and Mel Gray at the time went and did a scavenge hunt and acquired various bits of junk from the closing distillery. In 1975, LUCS was in fact established. The Civic Trust had an exhibition in 74 called Trades of the Town. They had it in the borough halls. Melville, in his own inimitable style, decided that building the canal was one of the trades of the town. He borrowed a tailor's dummy from Veitch, the gentleman's tailor who used to be in the high street, and he dressed it up as a canal navvy and put it into this Trades of the Town exhibition, which was mainly about the shoemaking trade and the linen making and dyeing trade from before. And he put a little notice beside it saying, if you're interested in doing something about the canal, write your name down here, please, and we'll get in touch. I just moved to Linlithgow. I moved to Linlithgow in 1974, and I decided to go to that exhibition, and I wanted to kind of get involved in my new community. I didn't know anybody in Linlithgow, So I thought, if I put my name down here, I'll maybe get involved in something. I wasn't the least bit interested in canals. I was a sailor at that time. I was commodore of the sailing club at Glasgow University. I was president of the sailing club at Honeywell, where I worked. So I liked sailing boats, particularly dinghies, but big yachts as well. But the canal seemed it was water-based, so that kind of rough connection. And my then wife didn't like sailing, so I thought maybe she might take to the canal better than she was taking to the ocean. So I put my name down, and nothing happened until the next spring. And I got a little postcard through the door inviting me to an inaugural meeting of the Canal Society at 6 Royal Terrace, which is Melville's house, chaired by the late Mel Gray. And the rest is kind of history, because after that, I went to the meeting as a complete stranger. I didn't know anybody in the town. Barbara used to pull my leg about the fact I lived at 17 Royal Terrace, and I took my car to drive to Melville's house at 6 Royal Terrace. Barbara thought that was very, very amusing, but it was mainly just because I didn't know my bearings. I didn't know where I was. Somehow a sort of security blanket, I suppose, felt better having my own car. But I turned up there and not knowing anybody, not knowing anything about canals, and I walked away from there as the newly elected technical convener of the newly formed Linlithgow Union Canal Society. Some of the other people were in there. Was Barbara was its first secretary. A guy called Alex Forsyth was the treasurer, and there was a guy called Roger. I think it was Roger Turnbull, who was meant to be the boats convener, who was meant to organise canal rallies and things like that. So we had Melville Gray as our chairman and a small committee, and I had to dash off and decide what on the earth did I do as a technical convener of the Union Canal. So I went to see Melville, and he suggested a few things. And the first thing that he suggested was that we had a perfectly good, in his opinion, dry dock just at the far side of the Avon Aqueduct. That is how it looked at some point in the past. I'm not sure exactly when that photograph was taken, but you can see here the aqueduct keeper's cottage with a nicely tended garden. You could see here the dry dock with a boat in it, another boat waiting to go in it. So it obviously was quite busy at that time. The Union Canal heading off towards Falkirk and backwards towards the Avon Aqueduct. That is how it was somewhat later, round about the time that LUCS was founded. It was looking a bit like that. A guy called Patterson had bought the keeper's cottage, and he was an architect, and he'd improved it. So there's the improved keeper's cottage. U60, which is another of the objects painted along the canal and numbered, was a barge, a scow, lying in the dry dock where it still lies today. And Melville thought that we could float U60 and have it as a nice boat, and we could clear out the dry dock and have it as a nice dry dock. He was a great optimist with Melville, and it all would be fine. Unfortunately, Mr. Patterson, who lived in the house, went to British Waterways and said he didn't like all these yobbos that were tramping over what he regarded as his land. It wasn't his land, it was British Waterways land. And so he took out a 99-year lease for all the land that involved the access to the dry dock. And we got a letter from British Waterways saying, we're very sorry, we've leased the land to Mr. Patterson and he doesn't want you there, so go away and stop doing your renovation work. So that didn't last very long. That is, I think, a more recent picture, but there's U60 sitting in the dry dock. Quite an interesting design, the Scottish scows. They had a little cabin, believe it or not, at the back here where the boat crew could take shelter from the weather. They had a bilge pump. This is a bilge pump here, which was a lift-type pump for pumping out the bilges. And when it was operating, there would have been a small stove in the cabin, and there'd be a wee chimney for that to keep them warm and dry. But nobody ever slept on the boat, so the cabin was quite tiny. And that's fairly typical of the boats that were used in the canal. And of course, U66. At the time LUCS was formed, U66 had been abandoned after the 1972 rally, and it was parked just opposite at Backstation Road. Coming up here, you can see our bridge into Mansfield Basin. It was parked there. You can see the watermark there where it had been previously, I think, near Polmont. It had been sitting on its side, but it was well and truly grounded because it had been pumped out dry, so it was put aground when it was dry. And that's what it looked like. And you can see they're pretty well the state it was in when we got it. It still had the various bollards round about it. It still had a cabin cook and a window, but no tiller. And it had some sort of decking round the outside, but it was pretty rotten. And it had no floorboards worth speaking of. The floorboards were, if you dared stand on them, you'd just fall straight through. So what did we do? You can see in the top picture there, I think that's Bob Murphy, and I'm not quite sure who the other people is. I think one of them is me, and one of them is probably Stephanie. We got our pump out. We hired a pump from Hewden Pumps at Newbridge. We pumped all the water out. We found all the holes, of which there were quite a few, and we patched them up. You can see one of the patches there. I worked at MESL at the time, and we did an awful lot of stuff made out of aluminium. So if you made an aluminium patch for the outside and one for the inside, and put some threaded inserts in the outside patch and some screws in the inside patch, you could screw it together with a bit of sealing compound, and you could close up the holes. So we closed up all the holes. We got Billy Braithwaite to make us a couple of hanging cradles. You can see one of them there out of steel. And we bought some railway sleepers and cut them in half and made a floor. So you can see there the floor. So it had a sound floor. We used some of the railway sleepers as well to do the gunnels. So the gunnels were made out of railway sleepers. There's a long story about them, but Melville's cousin ran a sawmill down in Leith, and Melville was very good at twisting people's arms and persuading them to do things. And he took this load of railway sleepers down to Leith and said to his cousin Charlie, "Would you mind slicing these in half, Charlie? Could we like them to be half the thickness that they currently are?" And Charlie very kindly obliged, and then told us later about the bill he had for his bandsaw, because some of them still had steel pins and what have you. And he did a fair bit of damage to his saw. But we got an awful lot of sort of sliced in half railway sleepers, which were an excellent form of construction materials for things like making floors and boat. So that's U60. We used U60. This is our very first canal rally that we had at Linlithgow, and we borrowed a horse. And this is Mr. McLaren, who lived in the at the top of the Station Road, and he very kindly helped us harness up the horse. And believe it or not, we've got all the way to Park Farm with the horse and back again on the boat. We renamed her. I can't remember what the name was, but something ridiculous like Queen of the Union. I think Ronnie Rusick at that time had Pride of the Union, so we named our boat Queen of the Union. And you could see our decked overall there, and it was quite a good time. At the same time, you can see there one of our converted weed cutters. I'll move on to them in a wee minute, but first of all, we're talking about Melville's tasks. The dry dock, kiboshed, U60, good idea. Kilmannon Basin was the next one, and Kilmannon Basin, as you know, is the basin on the canal. That was it about the time before Bridge 49 Bistro was built, and Melville thought it would really make a superb marina. So I went away with my calculator and worked out how many thousand tons of silt we'd have to take out to make it into a marina. And my biggest concern wasn't the tons of silt, but was the vulnerability. It was right out in the country, a really very vulnerable site. If I had a boat, I wouldn't want to keep it there. So I said that, and I didn't think it was a very good idea. That's another view. Kilmannon Basin at the time. And finally, a slipway. There wasn't a slipway at the basin, so we decided that we needed one. We wanted to be able to launch and recover boats. And we built this. You can see it here, the slipway. And it was two bits of rolled steel joist, RSJ, with the ubiquitous sawn in half railway sleepers as a deck between the two of them, and some tie bars tying the two together so the whole thing didn't collapse. The important thing about the slipway, I think, was that it went from the surface there, from the drive of Canal House, it went to the bottom of the canal. There were about 5 slipways I was told to go and look at. Most of them were made out of gabion boxes, and they were on the Forth and Clyde Canal. And they were all absolutely useless because they looked lovely when you saw them on the air side of the water. But as soon as you got under the water, they were dreadful. So if you had a trailer, as soon as you got to the water line, the wheels of the trailer fell off the end of the slipway, and it was a horrible mess. So we made a slipway that went right down to the bottom of the canal, so no matter how much water your boat drew when it went into the water, the trailer would still have some nice surface to run on. And that's it there. And we also acquired 2 of these weed cutters, which had been from British Waterways. and we took all the gear out of them. We took them off to Falkirk. We removed all the stuff inside, and they became our first trip boats. So there we've got U60 in all our glory. We've got the nice new slipway. That's me, would you believe? I had hair at the time. I'm not quite sure who the other people in the picture are. And then the next thought of Melville was the Canal Museum. And that is a picture of Rosie French, I think it is, painting the doors of the Canal Museum. And Bill Mitchell, who very kindly constructed the door from absolute scratch. The place was an absolute tip. It was a British Waterways tool store. And they let us have it. And we had to dig out all the mess that was in it, put a nice paving floor on the bottom, put a nice new door in, paint it all up, and we opened the Canal Museum. Some nice pictures there, Wilma. You'll recognise one of these ladies. That's Wilma and Barbara and Charles, who's Barbara's son, bringing some of the wildfowl exhibits to the new museum. There's Melville Gray and Tam Diel at the opening. And I thought I'd have a bit of a laugh. That's me, would you believe? And Ken Flew from the Kent and Avon Canal Society. Oh, it's that jacket. Oh dear. And that's Lynn, believe it or not, the lady to whom I'm now married, who looked after the aquarium that was in the museum. There's Tam, the first person to sign the book. That's Alf Claus there, who was the Secretary of SEWA at the time. And again, Rosemary French, I think. And we had a bit of a speech for opening it. That's Widgeon, which was my wee boat at the time. So I got Widgeon as a birthday present that very year, 1977. And we're motor on it, nice wee boat. And we again got U66 out and had a trip for all the dignitaries on U66. So you can recognise, I don't know if you can, how well you can see them, but you can recognise some of the people there. There's Billy Henry, the local historian. Craig Duncan, who was of the canoe club. There's Jim Clark there, and Agnes is his wife. Sandy Green, who was chair of the Civic Trust at the time. Melville, of course. God knows what I'm doing standing in the gunnel, but that's me. There's Bob Murphy at the back there. And that's Brian Davenport. He was the head of British Waterways Scotland at the time. So we had a really good day. We didn't have a horse on that occasion. It was man-hauled. Somebody pulled the boat along by hand. Around about the same time, 1975, Drambuie started a series of canal marathons between Glasgow and Edinburgh. The idea was, very well as you see there, two fit and stalwart people in a rubber boat with an outboard engine on the back that had to go from Glasgow to Edinburgh by themselves without any assistance. They had to carry their kit past any blockages that there might be, of which there were many, including all the locks on the Glasgow stretch of the Forth and Clyde Canal, of which the very first set you got to were Mary Hill. There was quite a dreadful flight of locks at Mary Hill we had to go up. And Bill Watt and I were kind of volunteered. Melville was very good at volunteering people. He came and said, would you like to take part in this canal marathon between Glasgow and Edinburgh? And Bill and I said, well, maybe. He said, well, I entered you. So we used Melville's outboard, which wasn't ideal. It was a water-cooled Chrysler two-cylinder engine that we had. We borrowed what we call a donut-type boat, which is very similar to that one, a boat that has got a tubular air chamber all the way around, including the transom, which is not very good because you put any power on the engine, it tends to tuck itself underneath the boat. And off we went. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you very much about the marathon because Danny's giving a talk later on in the series. I think in February, Danny, is it?
4 weeks today.
4 weeks today. And Danny's going to entertain you with all you need to know about the marathon in 4 weeks' time. But just for a bit of nostalgia, that's myself and Gavin. This is not the first year that we took part. Bill Watt and I did it the first year. There were 42 starters. There were 27 finishers. We finished 27th. They had a sweep-up boat at the back that was meant to persuade you to give up. And they used to keep on saying, "Are you going to give up?" No, we're not giving up. We're going to finish this. And it was run by an organisation called the London Motorboat Racing Club. A guy called Len Britnell from the London Motorboat Racing Club ran the Canal Marathon. And anyway, that's the year after when Bill Watt's wife, Anne, came to me and said, if you ever do a marathon again, do not ask Bill to come with you, because you just about killed him. So I got Gavin, who was an assistant. Bill at that time worked for the Edinburgh Council. He was an architect working for Edinburgh Council. Gavin was his assistant in the office. So that's Gavin Phillip, that Bill volunteered to take on his place, and myself in the 1976 marathon. But I'm not going to talk any more about marathons. Danny's talk, advert for Danny's talk, Wednesday the 12th of February, 7:30. Is that right, Danny?
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Isn't he smart? Right from the beginning, LUCS got involved in the marches. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the very early floats that we had in the marches. But again, 1975, I never even heard of the marches. And the elbow came down to my house and said, we're going to have to put a float in the marches. What's the marches? What's a float? So I ended up with my car. With the kids had a rocking horse. So the rocking horse became a canal horse. We made a cardboard of an aqueduct, and the horse pulled a mythical boat across the cardboard Avon aqueduct, and off I went and took part in the marches. But we had a float in the marches, I think, every year since. This was us in 1979, by which time we'd obviously got Victoria. I think that's Bruce Jameson there, those of you that recognise Bruce. And I've a funny feeling that's Stephanie, that's with Stephanie, Blackton or White, depending which era you're in. We had a number of these boats. This one was quite important. This is 1980. This was the first one that Bill Hamilton up at Clarendon Farm lent us a tractor which had two hydraulic arms that you could use for raising and lowering. That particular occasion, we didn't use the hydraulic arms for anything. We just put the tractor inside, so that was built round about the tractor. That was 1980. But after that, we really made maximum use of this tractor with the hydraulic arms. So that was 1981. It was an era when Brian Alps, who was then the husband of my now wife, he came and he'd had experience as a student in Bristol of building floats for the charities parade, the Rag Day, and he really knew how to build floats. So the first Brian float we had was 1981, was Linnessie, the idea of being Loch Ness for the Loch Nessie, Linnessie as well. We took it to Bo'ness. In fact, this picture I think was taken in Bo'ness, and all the people on the side that saw the Essie bit thought it was Bo'nessie, and you know the way of clapping Bo'ness, and all the ones that saw the linen that went boo because it was a Linlithgow float. That's Barbara in all her glory on the top of Linnessie. But at that time, although we used the two prongs that came out the front of the tractor, we didn't use them to any great extent. They just simply were there. The heads were pretty well static. The year after that, we made Dumbo. This time we managed to actually use the hydraulic floats so that we could raise and lower Dumbo's head. And that is Brian in his clown's outfit, the architect of these really successful floats. Barbara seems to spend her time sitting on top of floats. There's Barbara sitting on top of the float, enjoying herself on the marches day. And I think, again, that picture is also taken in Bo'ness. And we won I think it's, what's the name of the Anderson, is it the Anderson Trophy? Sorry? Snedden, the Snedden Trophy, which is the main trophy in Bo'ness. We won it, and we got handed over an envelope with a cheque in it, quite a reasonable cheque at that particular time. We never saw the trophy. Never ever. We don't know if our name's engraved in it as a winner, but we never saw the trophy. It was never presented to us. The year after that, we decided to really go our dinger. So you can see there's Bill's tractor the way it was just about when we got it. And the process of construction, you can see they would build a wooden framework. We then put a chicken netting, wire mesh, round about the wooden framework to form a shape. Then there's Danny up the top of a ladder and Melville Gray. We then put paper mache on top of the framework, and then we painted it. So this was E.T., the extraterrestrial, which happened to be the flavour of the month that particular year. And there it is going round the cross on March 1983. Quite fantastic.
Yes.
And yeah, that was the end, unfortunately, of our floats incorporating Bill's tractor. He got to the point that he really was being deprived of his tractor for rather too much of the year. So he regretfully told us that we couldn't have it anymore. And the year after that, I haven't got a picture of it, but we did a fantastic float, which was simply a golf trolley. And Brian made the same construction method, paper mache and wire framework, made a bull's head out of that. And we did a bullfight with Danny as the matador. And we took it to Edinburgh, to the Edinburgh Festival Cavalcade. And it really stole the show on that occasion. It was absolutely fantastic, like, in Edinburgh. About boats, I mentioned before that we got these weed cutters from British Waterways. We took them down to SRPS. They didn't have their facility at Bowness at that time. What they did have was they had a depot in Falkirk, which was connected to the railway system. It was a railway depot, but it wasn't connected to any track that they owned. And they had a lot of the wagons and the locomotives and what have you that they now have. They had in that place doing them up. So they were doing them up long before they actually had anywhere to actually run them. They ran a SRPS rail tour. They ran the rail tour even back then, but they didn't have to actually operate a steam railway. But they very kindly helped us by helping us to remove the bits inside that we didn't want in these little boats. And they helped us to weld up the various holes and what have you that appeared in the boats. A couple of quite interesting things here. There's Melville again, who's omnipresent. It wasn't always a great asset, was Melville, when you were doing things mechanical, but it was always there. Melville was very useful for as a fixer for getting things done. And the trailer you see there, we've got a nice close coupled four-wheel trailer. That was Mr. Gunn, who was at that time building Barnes Hill. And Gunn the builder, Melville, typical Melville, just barged into his office and asked if he could borrow his trailer. And he couldn't really very well say no. It was very hard to say no to Melville. So we borrowed his trailer and stuck it. I think that's Bob Murphy's car, but it spent a fair bit of time in the back of my car and Bob's car, towing boats about the place from one place to another. Bear in mind, with all the blockages, if you wanted to go somewhere that wasn't on your stretch of canal, you had to get a trailer and tow the boats. And these particular wee boats found themselves all sorts of places, Harrison Park in Edinburgh. I think they went to Forth and Clyde a couple of times. So we used them a lot. That's what they looked like when they were in operation. Again, I'm not quite sure who that is that's driving the boat, but we had a Yamaha. The best kind of engines to have on the canal tend to be air-cooled engines. Water cooling doesn't always work when you've got a lot of weed about. So that was an engine and the boat, and that was out doing the work party. We did a lot of work parties, but normally we used the boats as our very, very first passenger boats. So there is one of the wee boats fitted out as a passenger boat. It's got stacking chairs on it, and I think we could take 6 passengers plus the driver. So there was space for seven people, and that was it full. And we did trips from the basin to Preston Road and back again. Some other boats. Bill Watt was an inveterate boat builder. That's one of the boats that he built out of wood, obviously, a rowing boat. After that, he got fed up using wood and he made his boats out of steel. And the latest one of Bill's boats was number 5, that was number 1. So he made 4 steel boats, and number 5 got converted into 5.5, and I think 5.5 still remains supreme. LUCS itself had a couple of little plastic rowing boats. That's one of them there, and that is Bill Watt that's rowing that one. And Ronnie, is it? That's right. That's Widgeon, which is my wee boat. And here we have, that's Ronnie Hobson again, and Melville Gray and Ken Clue of the Kennet and Avon Canal Society. We had a good relationship with Kennet and Avon. They had exactly the same problem as us. They had a derelict canal with an awful lot of work needing done on it, with potential to be useful in the future. And we also had a boat here, Canaletto. I don't know if you remember Canaletto. We had 2 boats, in fact, that were available for LUCS members. One was Canaletto, the other one I think was called Birchwood. Remember Birchwood? It
was a Birchwood, a little bit.
Yeah. Anyway, there were 2 boats that we had that were available for members to use. And we also had quite a few of our members had boats, of which the most extraordinary one was Bill Rathy, who had a boat called a Cara Cruiser, I think it was called, and it was a mixture of a caravan and a boat, and it was useless in both respects. It was a dreadful caravan. It wasn't a very good boat, but he used that. We also went elsewhere. There's the same boat of Bill Watts at Winchborough, in a crazy boat race in Winchborough. That's Ian Watt, Bill's son, in a sort of polystyrene construction made for a crazy boat race at Winchborough. And we also had a good relationship with the Honourable Society of Edinburgh Punters. And that, I think, is Forbes Marr, with his punt here at the Canal Basin. I never realised how difficult it was actually to propel a punt in a straight line until they came. And believe it or not, they actually gave us their punts at the end of when they got fed up punting, and we had a couple of punts from them for quite a wee while. Two bigger boats, that's Alec Ingalls, which was built. Was it the one that was built at Telford? Yeah, built at Telford College. And there's Graham Harvey, who became chairman later on, and Melville toasting the launching of Alex Ingalls. And further afield, there were one or two other boats. Hugh Baird, nice boat, on the canal. We had the use of Hugh Baird at one time, but I don't think, if I'm strictly sticking to my first 10 years, I think we had the use of Hugh Baird after the 10 years were up, but nonetheless. And Janet Telford, which was also constructed and used on the canal. I think that must be, was that Winchborough that Janet Telford's right there?
Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, Alec Ingalls, if we go back a slide, we used as a floating tea room here in the basin for quite a long time. In the early days of the tea room, we didn't go anywhere, but you could sit in there and have a cup of tea before we actually had the tea room. Stone Couple, the Marquess of Linlithgow was our honorary president, and he gave us rights to use a site in Hopton grounds at Stone Couple, which is quite near Old Cathay. It's sort of between Fons Park and Old Cathay. It had an old house, but you can see it was pretty well derelict already. The roof timbers had gone. And we were allowed to use this place for rallies and picnics and other outings, days out, so long as we arrived there by boat. That was the only condition. We had indefinite use of Stone Couple, so long as the arrival and departure was done by boat and not by road. Just as well, because there isn't really a road that goes to it. And you can see there we had hunting races at Stone Couple. The main thing that we used to have was barbecues. So we'd have picnics and barbecues and canal races and just generally enjoy Stone Couple. Some of the early members, I've made a few mug shots here. Most of you can probably recognise some of these. Melville, Barbara, Bill Watt, Stephanie, Ronnie Hobson, Bill and Wilma Thompson, Bob Murphy. Bob Murphy's a difficult one because Bob took nearly all of these photographs I'm showing you were taken by Bob Murphy. He was an excellent photographer, but unfortunately he very rarely allowed himself to go on the other side of the lens, as a result of which it's quite difficult to find a decent photo of Bob Murphy. That, believe it or not, is Bob Wigley, Ian Raven. You'll recognise Danny there and his then wife Liz. John Ferguson, who was the headmaster at Linlithgow School. You'll not recognise this chap. Graham Harvey, Bob Wilde, who was a friend of Graham Harvey's, and Di Wilde, his good lady wife. Tom Hill, who was the chairman after me. I was the second. Mel was the first chairman. I was second. Tom Hill was third. Another picture of Lynn, just to keep you amusing. And Ronnie Rusick, who wasn't really a member, but Ronnie was always around. He took part in the canal marathons. He made us very welcome in the Pride of the Union. So, although Ronnie wasn't really part of LUCS, he was part of LUCS. There's a whole host of other people. I started making a list of names, and I was actually going to read them all out today. And then I realised the list was getting far too long, and you get bored after a while. But there were a lot of people. I would say, how many have we got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's quite 20 there. There must have been at least another 40. There must have been about 60 people who made LUCS work in those days. Yeah, yeah, okay. Don't remind us about that. Ronnie Rusick had a problem with the Pride of the Union. At the time, it was before the pop-in was built at the Bridge Inn at Ratho. And the Bridge Inn at Ratho had a public bar which the local people used, and it had the restaurant which was very busy and usually full. And he had nowhere to put the people who were going to go on the boat. You know, people turned up to go on the boat, and Ronnie had nowhere to put them. So he decided that he would purchase or acquire a Glasgow subway car, and he would use it as a waiting room for the boat.
All the
This
bits
is
of it are in my
property
bag
got on
and
the road, as
things.
it often did with Ronnie,
Yeah,
and
the
health
bits,
and safety
the
or
bits you
whatever
see
wouldn't
there, I'm
allow
not
them
using.
to make use of the subway car as a waiting room for the boat. At that time, we only had one boat. He had the Pride of the Union, and it was really quite a pity because the restaurant really got very crowded with people waiting to get on. But he wasn't allowed to have it. So having a spare subway car, he decided to give it to us. Now, I don't know how long it had stayed outside Ronnie's place before we got it, but it was in a dreadful state. That is pretty well how it was when we got it. And I think that's Johnny Galloway there, Barbara up on top. Very, very brave of Barbara because Barbara was kind of allergic to the fumes from paint and dust and what have you. And she, not quite single-handedly, but she did the bulk of the work. Barbara did an awful lot of work, stripping this thing off and repainting it. And that's what we ended up with. Quite impressive. It won a competition. ICI, who provided the paint free of charge, had a competition for the best use of their paint. And we won that. And Barbara and Tom Hill got going down to London for the prize giving. And they got a prize of £150. We got a cheque for £150. And obviously recognition for the stalwart work we'd done. You can see that Glasgow Corporation were quite nice to us because they gave us the transfers for the Glasgow coat of arms and the car number and what have you that we could put on. But it really looked lovely when it was finished. Rather sadly, we didn't have any use for it either. It was taking up an awful lot of space in Canal Yard, which we were needing for other things. That is Canal Yard at the time when there was virtually nothing in it. And we had to make a decision, and we decided that we put it into storage up at Preston Farm. And unfortunately, that was the end of it. I think it got burned or something like that. It's no longer in existence. A number of enthusiasts asked me, where is it now? But I don't believe it exists anymore. Fundraising, we had lots of fun fundraising. Jumble sales, I think that's Lynn and Liz Callahan at a jumble sale, probably in the Guide Hall in Dogwell Wine. Is that Hazel? Yeah, okay. We had a stand, and I think you've got to remember in those days it was the days before computers. So if you wanted to do a banner like that on Linlithgow Union Canal Society, you literally had to get a big long roll of paper and paint it. It was all everything was done by hand. There wasn't any mechanized arrangements. And that is again that Hazel and Liz and Stephanie at the sales stall. So Bob Murphy, apart from being an excellent photographer, was pretty good with his hands, making joinery work as well. So we made this sales stall, which came to pieces quite easily and got transported and turned up all over the place. We also had dances, and I think that's a lovely picture of Melville and my ex-wife, Kate, at Park Farm, which is now Park Bistro. We were having a barn dance on that occasion. We had a number of barn dances. We had dances at Park, and we also had dances at Gilston, near, where I've forgotten his name temporarily. Bill, can't help me. Wiley, Bill Wiley. He was the financial accountant for the guy that bought all the shale bins. Made a lot of money selling the shale for road bottoming and what have you. And he and Gilston Farm, he lent us have his barn there. But we also had dances and parties, mainly cheese and wine parties in some of the fancy houses in Linlithgow. So we had a cheese and wine party at Bonnyton House, we had a cheese and wine party at Nether Parkley, we had a cheese and wine party at Boghall House just up the road. So we had a lot of cheese and wine parties. We had dances, which were usually in the Masonic Hall. We used to get, it was called the Joko Gallon Quartet, and there were 4 people played their instruments in that. And then one of them deemed it became the Joko Gallon Trio, but he got all these uniforms and what have you, which had JKQ on them, so he just kept it as JKQ. And then one of the 3 of them passed away, and it ended up with just Joko Gallon and a robot drummer. With what you got. But we had fairly regular dances. They were good fun apart from raising money. This is an interlude. I mentioned the London Motorboat Racing Club as the people that ran the Dranbury Canal Marathon. There's a picture of Little Venice in London, which is nearest to get. And they ran a marathon in London, around London on the canals. It started at Putney Hard. It went down the Thames under Tower Bridge, came out at Limehouse at the docks, went on to the Regent's Canal, went to Little Venice, went on to the Grand Union Canal, came back onto the Thames at Brentford and back down to Putney Harbour. 2 days round London on the canal. No bother, except it was February and the canal had ice on it at the time. Also, when we did our recce, we took the boat down to Limehouse to the docks, and there was a lift of maybe about 3 or 4 feet from the water level in the Thames River to the top of the canal docks. And we thought, no bother. When we actually did it on the day, it wasn't 2 or 3 feet, it was about 7 feet because the tide had gone out. So we had a bit of a struggle getting up there. But anyway, myself and Ian Watt took part in that, and we really enjoyed doing it. Graham Harvey's mum and dad lived in London, so they very kindly accommodated us. So we stayed at Graham Harvey's mum and dad's house. Graham came with us, and we had a good time. Really enjoyed it. There were some really good friendships made during that London marathon. We were told under no uncertain terms that we had to go underneath the wings, if you like, of the Tower Bridge. We weren't to sail right through the middle. So every single boat, I think, that took part in that marathon sailed right through the middle of the Tower Bridge. It was a good experience. On the way back from that, Bill Watt suggested to me that there was this boat he'd seen in one of the Waterways magazines, and he thought we ought to have a look at it. So he'd arranged on the way back from the London Marathon for us to drop off at Welford and have a look at Victoria. And the picture up there is one of the few pictures I've got of Victoria as she originally was. She was built in 1972, and that picture, I think, comes from 72 or 73. Few changes, the main change being that she used to be steered by a tiller on the rear deck. So you can see the chappie there, he's steering the boat. And also you can see there's a life belt on the side of the boat rather than on the roof. Anyway, Bill and I think Graham Harvey was there as well, we fell in love with Victoria. We saw Victoria and we said, we have to have this boat. So David White was the guy that was selling her, and I said to David, look, David, will you sell us your boat if we can find the money to buy it? And he said, yes. And I said, well, the bad news is we haven't actually got the money to buy it. Will you give us a couple of months to raise the money? And he said, yes, he would do that. So we started really very active fundraising, and we were very fortunate. We got some support from Lothian Regional Council. They gave us half the money. I think it was about £4,000 altogether, and we raised 2,000 and they gave us 2,000, and we bought it. The survey, believe it or not, this is the surveyor here doing the survey in the boat. We hired a crane, we picked the boat up in the sky. The surveyor came round with his little wire brush and his hammer, broke the hull. We said, aye, that's fine, it's sound. And then we loaded it down onto a low loader and brought it back up to Scotland. So there it is. Hugh Harper's low loader with the boat on. You'll see that she's looking an awful lot nicer there than she was in the picture the day before. So how did she manage to get that much nicer? We took her to Hugh Harper's depot the night before, and we had a gang of people with the cans of paint and what have you. So we painted all the black paint on the hull, and I think the white paint as well, black and white paint. So it was quite not quite an all-night job, but it was a long job putting a coat of paint on the boat, and then it came up. I love that picture because apart from anything else, it showed Victoria arriving here at the canal basin, but you can also see the alternative arrangement for those of you who are mechanically minded at the stern of the boat. Two very, very big problems. The first one is that the rudder is the furthest back thing on the boat. So if you happen to back into anything, you hit the rudder before you hit anything else. But much more seriously is there a whacking great gap. It's about 2 feet between the propeller which drives the boat along and the rudder which steers it. As a result of which, by the time the wash gets to the rudder, it's completely utterly ineffective. The boat could not really turn round. And we used to put somebody ashore at Friar's Brae with a rope in order to catch the boat and pull her round, because she wouldn't turn round on her own steam. So what we did very shortly after that was we moved the rudder forward about 18 inches. And we also put the rudder you see there is entirely trailing. It goes from the rudder post backwards. We put a bit of forward stuff on it as well. I'm watching my time here and I'm running over, so I'll be a bit quicker. That's her going in. Not on that occasion because you'll notice she's got red. We used to, believe it or not, yachts in general on boats used to use anti-fouling paint underneath the water. It's more important on seawater because you get all sorts of barnacles and things grow. But that's red anti-fouling that she used to have underneath her. It's now illegal. Here she is having a trip. And I made a model of Victoria, and I think these two pictures are absolutely beautiful. That's my model of it. These are real, no Photoshop dolls. That's my model of Victoria and the actual Victoria side by side here at the basin. We had a period of Victorian Scotland with Victorian costumes. You can see some people there. Bob Wilde, Stephanie, that's Billy Braithwaite, Wilma, Tom Hill, Barbara, Bob Wilde. Yeah. And the LUCS logo, the original one was one up there, which I designed based on the Avon Aqueduct. And we had a guy called Lamon Lang who did the flyer for Victoria. And he produced this picture, which Barbara objected to because it showed Victoria going over the aqueduct. And of course, Victoria could not actually go over the aqueduct at that time because Preston Road was in the way. But nonetheless, we had a company called Signet Ties, I don't know if they're still in the town, who I think they're called Network Marketing now, who made various things for us. And they decided that was a much better logo than that one, so we changed logos. Wider Field Scottish Inland Waterways were becoming, rather than a membership organisation, an organisation of organisations. So individual canal societies became members of SEWA. The Waterways Recovery Group did a lot of work on English and Scottish canals. We did the clear-outs of locks on the Forth and Clyde. The IWA had an annual canal rally, and we went to several of these. We went to 3 of them, I think, that I can remember going to, at which the Micron Theatre Company performed. Did a play called Where's Our Cut, and we brought that to Linlithgow. As I said before, we had a good relationship with the Kennet and Avon Canal Society, and Victoria was related to the old Union Canal Society, so they came together with us. I was working in America some of the time, so Chesapeake and Ohio got involved with, and the Pride of the Union. Oh, sorry, that was the rallies that we went to. Northwich on the River Weaver, the Lee Valley on the River Lee, and the Ayr and Calder at Leeds. And oops, these are going the wrong way now. That was the Anderton boat lift. I'm running over time here. Does anybody mind? No. Okay, I won't rattle on too quickly then. That's the Anderton boat lift, which was a hydraulic lift originally, converted to electric, now converted back to hydraulic. This is the River Weaver down here, and it lifted boats vertically up and down the way onto the canal above. So we had a wee trip on that. And that's the Micron Theatre's boat. That's the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. Not that different from the Union, to be perfectly honest. Around about 30 miles long. It goes along the River Potomac in Maryland. Just the same route as the river, but of course, being a canal, it's got locks and it's level. And the society there had this lovely boat made out of concrete, which I think you can just about read it. It's name, I can't remember what I called it anyway. But they had it pulled by 2 horses, and they had quite good. They had costumed people on the boat, and the guy with an Appalachian dulcimer and singers and what have you. Really made quite a thing of doing boat trips on the Chesapeake in Ohio. So I spent a bit of time helping them. They had this big canal museum. That's their canal museum in the C&O. The Pride of the Union, of course, at Ratho, I've mentioned. The Seagull Trust as well. The Seagull Trust is now Bluebell, run by the Bridge 15 to 49 Society in Winchborough, or Broxburn. She was brought in 1979. She was an English narrowboat, and she was converted in a pretty small way. They put a hydraulic lift so that they could have wheelchairs on board. That was about the bulk of the conversion. So that was the first boat the Seagull Trust had. That's the Pride of the Union turning at Ratho, Bridgin. And that's the St. John Crusader, wending its way merrily along. I think that is also at Ratho, to be honest. Kettleston Quarry, just a bit of nostalgia here. That is what Kettleston Quarry looked like in 1975. You can't actually see the rock face now, it's still there. All the trees have gone up. That was the dynamite hut we had for the blasting materials. And we had a big breach in the canal, 1980 something, 83, I think it was. And that's myself and Bob Murphy looking at the mud. Preston Road, as it then was. And this is a bit of a cheat because it was after the 10 years was up, but nonetheless, here we are with them reconstituting the canal. And you can see what they did. They dug it back quite a long way. They put in a membrane, a non-permeable membrane to hold the water in. They then put some sand on top, and then they put the puddle clay on top of that. So it's a pretty good. Yeah, pretty good structure at that time, pretty solid. We also had a breach at Park, and that's what happened there. There was a culvert underneath the canal. I think what happened was there was actually deliberately a plug on the bottom of the canal that you could use to let the water out. Somebody dislodged it and didn't bother stopping the water getting out, and eventually the water washed away the bank of the canal. Yeah, Santa. Some Santa cruises, they started a long time ago. The Edinburgh bypass, in spite of the Stirling inquiry, British Waterways proposed that they would terminate the canal on the west side of the proposed Edinburgh bypass. We had another public inquiry. I went and gave evidence to it, and 1982, I think it was, or 83, the public inquiry, and eventually we got the Scott Russell Aqueduct opened in 1986. Here it is there, going over the Edinburgh bypass. Thank goodness we did that, because we'd never have the canal restored if we hadn't. Canal Fund Day we've had for a long time. I kind of had to put that in. It's not kosher because it's 1989, which is after my 10-year period. That's myself and my daughter Katie and one of our friends in the very first cardboard boat race in 1989, made of Abercorn it was called. The rules have changed since then, but there weren't any rules about not painting a boat at that time, so we painted it. In actual fact, it doesn't make any difference. So there you are. I hope that you've enjoyed my wee talk. We think that the Linlithgow Union Canal Society has been a great success. Certainly the first 10 years were very enjoyable. I'm still a member and I've always enjoyed being a member. And we think we've created an asset to both the Union Canal and the community of Linlithgow.